Furs. Furs and fur garments are taken from the hide of an animal, much like leather, but in these instances, the fur remains on the hide. Again, the difference between hair-on hides and furs is very subtle. The main difference is that for furs, you would typically never see these animals being used as solely leather. With hair-on hides, the animals that provide the hair-on hides are more commonly seen as a source of leather. Also, the hair or fur part on the hair-on hides is typically quite short, where furs we typically see is a bit longer. Now, traditionally, man has harvested fur from pretty much any animal that has fur. And we saw, even maybe 50 years ago, well, maybe more than that, a much wider variety of animals being used for fur. I have not included the full gamut of animals that have been used for fur in this lecture. One, we'd be here forever, because again, pretty much any animal that has fur has at some point been made into a fur garment, unfortunately for them. And a couple things have happened that we'll talk about later. One, a lot of protections have come in for animals because they were overhunted and overtrapped, which really hurt their numbers. So to protect them, conservation measures were put into place, and moratoriums on their trapping and hunting was put into place. However, there are still animals, mostly that have been raised on farms. Today, 80% of the fur used in garments come from fur farms, animals raised specifically for their fur. Only about 20% of fur in the industry still comes from trapping. And these trappers are heavily regulated with sustainable conservation measures to ensure the populations of the animals they trap are not harmed or brought to threatening levels. Even so, many of the animals most commonly used for their fur historically now have moratoriums on their hunting and trapping for fur, so we do not see them. These can include exotic cats like tigers and leopards. Even in the 90s, you could still find snow leopard skins and coats in furriers. You cannot find them today. Ever increasing and ever stricter measures of ensuring that threatened or endangered animals aren't hunted for their fur have been put in place, and for good reason. It would be a shame that the only tiger skins and furs that we could see anymore was in a coat and not on a tiger. But even animals that we don't associate, like exotic cats and things like that, have also been placed under trapping and hunting moratoriums. Species like beavers and otters and wild ferrets all used to be hunted for their fur. No longer. Again, the fur trade, which we'll talk about later a little bit, really devastated a lot of wild populations, and drastic measures had to be put in place to save a lot of these species. All of these measures are still in effect. So I'm only going to talk about the furs that are still commonly used today. What are the properties of fur? They're incredibly warm and insulating, more so than anything else. They're soft and pleasant to touch. They must be cleaned and maintained by a professional, It's one of the most difficult garments to keep and maintain. They must be stored at appropriate temperatures and humidity. And they were the first material to be used as textiles by humans. So even though fur is waning in popularity today, we cannot deny that it has had a very important role culturally in almost every human society across the globe, especially in colder climates, where fur was absolutely a necessity to stay alive. Fur from different animals has become culturally important for many, many different societies and has been associated with different things. For example, the European royalty used to associate themselves with a white or ermine, much like Zulu royalty would associate themselves with leopard skins. How to ID fur. Synthetic fur has become very good at imitating the real thing. However, there are ways to tell the two apart. Real fur will have a leathery backing where the fur attaches. Fake fur will often be placed in a woven backing. So look at the underside of the fabric. If it looks like a cloth, if it looks like it's woven, it's probably fake fur. If the backing looks more like leather, it will be real fur. Now this won't help you if the garment is lined, but sometimes you can find a way to peek behind the lining to see what it looks like. The feel of real fur will be natural, like petting a cat. Synthetic fur will feel a bit drier and more like soft plastic. It used to be very, very easy to tell the two apart by feel, but synthetics have gotten quite good, and even the best can be fooled sometimes. The burn test. Of course, the burn test is probably the easiest way to tell the two apart. The hairy part of real fur will burn a lot like wool. It'll be resistant to flame and smell like burning hair. The back part of real fur will burn like leather, incredibly resistant to catching a flame and tend to char with black instead of burning up. Synthetic fake fur will burn like a synthetic. Each part of it will easily catch fire and burn with a thick black smoke and melt as it burns. So as I mentioned, there are two places that we can get fur from. We can get fur from the wild. It can be sourced from the wild by trapping animals in nature. This is an image of the Manitoba Trappers Association. It's a big event where trappers come in with their hides to get appraised and connected with dealers that want to buy their hides from the wild. In places like Canada, trapping is still done from the wild, but is subject to strict conservation measures. Each trapper is held to a specific limit on the animal to ensure the native populations of animals are not harmed. It's an important livelihood for these people, many of which were First Nations people and still rely on the income of trapping, which was something culturally their people did throughout history. As mentioned before, only 20% of our fur comes from trapping animals in the wild. The other 80% of fur are sourced from farms that are raised on farms specifically to harvest animals for their fur. This is an image of an American mink farmer.